Welcome to State of Affairs. I'm Steve Adubato, coming to you from the Agnes Veris NJTV studio in Newark, New Jersey. It is our pleasure to welcome Mike DuHaime, Republican strategist and partner at Mercury. Mercury is
a public affairs firm, high-stakes public strategy. We do things like polling, advertising, crisis management, PR, that type of work.
People have crises?
A few of them, yeah.
Mike also was one of the key political strategists for Governor Christie, and has worked on presidential campaigns as well. Rudy Giuliani, no? Back in the day?
I managed Rudy's race. I worked on President George W. Bush's race as well, and Senator McCain as well, so a handful of them.
As young as you are, you've had incredible experiences on state and national political issues. The tone of our political discourse today, Mike, as toxic as it appears?
Yeah, it is. It's bad. I think you can talk about the reasons why, but it's not something new either. I think there's so much heightened anxiety now. We act as if it's new, that the last election cycle. Now maybe it was worse than usual, but it's certainly not new. Certainly there's been time over, I think, the last 20 years where this has ebbed and flowed a bit. But it's at a peak now, but it's certainly not new. And quite frankly, it goes all the way back to the founding. I mean, Thomas Jefferson and John Adams went at it in 1800 like people have never done before. They didn't have cable TV then, so it's not a scene.
They also didn't have Twitter.
No, they had no Twitter at the time.
So let's do this. The impact that you see President Trump having, A, on the discourse in our country, and B, his ability to potentially get things done that matter in people's lives, which is how he got elected.
Yeah. Well, I think I'll take the second part first. I think the ability to get things done right now is being strangled by the day-to-day controversy. I mean, as the more we talk about whether it's the Russia investigation or any controversy that comes up, the less we're talking about a bill on infrastructure, the less we're talking about tax reform, the less we're debating the merits of health care reform. And those are big, weighty issues, but they're all sidetracked right now. And ultimately, he'll be judged, and Congress will be judged on whether or not they get things done. And without the ability to have any kind of public discourse or debate, it makes that all a lot harder.
Would you, if you were advising the president, how would you tell him or advise him to try to get back on track? Or is it literally impossible to focus on the business of this nation while these things are happening?
Well, I think it's certainly harder while these things are happening. But one thing that Trump has shown, President Trump has shown during his time as a candidate, and even before he was ever a candidate, is the ability to suck the oxygen out of the media cycle and have everyone focus on what he wants them to focus on. He was expert at that during the campaign. There were a dozen other good candidates in the race, including our governor. But he was able to refocus everyone on him when he needed to do that. I think he still has that ability. He's choosing to have them focus on things that probably don't help him in terms of the policy agenda that we just spoke about, but he certainly has the ability to do it.
Last question on Trump. Campaigning, governing, huge difference?
It's a huge difference. Certainly, campaigning, just the campaign itself is a small structure, a small group of people around. And then when you go to work in the federal government, the United States government is the largest operation in the world. You need to delegate a lot more than you do in a campaign. You need to set a vision and then have good people around you. I think what he really needs are people around him who can help implement a vision. Whether you agree with the vision or not, what he doesn't have right now are people that can help him implement, help him do things in the agencies to actually bring about some of the change that he promised.
Let's bring it back closer to home. This race in 2017 to replace Governor Christie will be fought on what grounds between Democrat Phil Murphy and Republican Kim Guadagno?
I think Phil Murphy would like to have it on kind of broad grounds of ideological grounds, kind of liberal, conservative, Republican, Democrat. New Jersey's a very Democrat state, 750,000 more Democrats than Republicans, ideologically leaning more and more to the left. I think it will try to keep it on those grounds.
Will he try, excuse me, Mike, will he in fact try to make it about Chris Christie? And whatever he thinks is unpopular about the governor, will he try to go back and do that?
I think he will try to do that on Chris Christie. I think he'll try to also do it on Donald Trump to bring in what we just talked about. Anything he can do to show that I'm kind of the Democrat, the progressive in a progressive state, I think will be what he tries to do. I think Lieutenant Governor needs to make the sell that there have been some positive things that have happened in the last 8 years. You need a Republican in the executive branch to counter the legislative branch, which has tried to raise taxes, tried to increase spending, and that this balance of power has worked for New Jersey. Unemployment is half of what it was 8 years ago. There are hundreds of thousands of new jobs. The private sector is growing while the public sector has shrunk. To make that case is not as easy as a Republican because you know you're kind of going uphill, but you kind of know that going into a race.
Let me ask you this. Governor Christie, you've enjoyed a very close professional and personal relationship, and we intend to sit down with Governor Christie, hopefully for a powerful, poignant, and important retrospective conversation at the appropriate time as his term ends. But how do you look at his 7.5 going on 8 years as governor? Big picture, how do you look at it?
I feel he's done some really difficult things and made a great deal of progress in the state. I look at the things he's tried to tackle, such as pension reform, as an example. That New Jersey has some almost intractable problems that are set in place by the Supreme Court in New Jersey in terms of mandating certain amounts of spending, whether it's on education, pension reform, things of that nature. He has tried to make big differences, and he's made them. He also inherited the state at a time when the budget and the unemployment numbers were in shambles. He was able to turn the ship around, right the direction of the state, while at the same time taking on some major crises that came his way. Superstorm Sandy obviously comes to the level that he's somebody who I believe is a true leader. He rose to the occasion at that moment, while at the same time trying to take on intractable problems and work with Democrats. One of the things I don't think at this stage of his tenure gets enough credit for is how well he's worked across the aisle, bringing Republicans and Democrats together to make some of these reforms.
Bridgegate. Once it happened, and once the coverage in the media around it happened, the trial happens. Public opinions shaped by those things and others. Excuse my voice, allergies. I say every time I'm taping my voice like this, I just want to tell you, it's not, hopefully it won't be my normal voice for long. What impact do you think that has had on the governor's ability to do what he has wanted to do in his second term?
It's definitely had an impact. I think it's made it less likely that people have wanted to work with him. This certainly came about at a time when he was very popular. He'd just been reelected with a historic margin over 60% of the vote. And certainly was being talked about as a potential presidential candidate or even frontrunner at that time. I think certainly our proximity to New York and the national media market made this a bigger story than maybe it would have been in another state. But I think what it meant for his second-term agenda was that people who had been willing to cross the aisle, Democrats specifically, been willing to cross the aisle to work with him on policy items in the first term were much less likely to, as his poll numbers went down. I mean, I know it's crazy in politics that politicians would pay attention to those things, but they do. So it became less popular to work with him, and therefore much harder when you're in the minority party.
One more question on Chris Christie in connection with the presidential race. You were a key player in that. There's no one reason why a campaign doesn't have the outcome that it wants to. What do you think the reasons Chris Christie's presidential campaign played out the way it did? And is that reason ultimately Donald Trump?
Donald Trump is probably the biggest reason. I think Chris Christie would have taken that, the mantle of the person kind of saying what he thinks.
In spite of the challenges connected to Bridgegate and anything else the governor was carrying from New Jersey, you still feel like he would have been the odds-on favorite?
I think he would have been, I don't know if he'd been the odds-on favorite, very strong field, but he would have been very competitive at that point. And the other thing which I think people in New Jersey don't always appreciate is just how hard it is for someone who's perceived as a moderate from the Northeast to do well in a Republican primary. I worked for Rudy Giuliani. I worked for Rudy Giuliani. I worked for Chris Christie.
Moderates.
Who are perceived as even more moderate than they are. If you ask people in New Jersey, they're going to say those guys are conservative, certainly Chris Christie.
Put it in the rest of the country, what do they look like?
They look like Northeastern moderates. They work with Democrats. We heard much less about Bridgegate than we did about working with President Obama during Superstorm Sandy.
Like, how dare Chris Christie work with Obama as the president?
Yes,
Republicans. The governor told us, he said, I did my job.
Republicans in other parts of the country saw that as some sort of betrayal of Republican values, that you would work with the president during a time of crisis. Not all Republicans, obviously, but there were some very conservative folks who just said, okay, this guy must not be like us. He must not be conservative enough. What do you mean like us? Mike, so what does that say about the Republican Party? And enough of them, particularly Tea Party folks, what do they really want? Well, there's enough. But my faith always comes back to the folks who are more moderate do tend to win. John McCain, Donald Trump is certainly not the most conservative person in the primary, and he was able to win as well.
We're talking about candidate Trump at a certain time, pre-candidate Trump, or President Trump?
All one and the same. All one and the same. Well, in terms of what it meant to people at the time, it was candidate and pre-candidate Trump. People thought he was the guy from The Apprentice. We, again, living in this media market, we know Donald Trump for 50 years. Most people in the rest of the country were introduced to Donald Trump through The Apprentice and thought that was the guy right.
That was an advantage for him?
A huge advantage for him. Name identification.
The Apprentice?
Two things. Huge name identification. We think everybody knows who Marco Rubio or Jeb Bush is. They don't. Everybody knew who Donald Trump was. And they looked at this guy that he's a boss. He is a guy who makes decisions. He fires people. And that's what we need in the Oval Office.
It's a TV show with it.
I know, but marketing and branding was everything, and he is master at that.
How much do you get concerned about the fact that you are a moderate? You interact with all kinds of people, including Democrats at your firm at Mercury. And there are policies in Washington, healthcare being one. I'm not going to get into the minutia of it, but I'm betting, Mike DuHaime, that you're concerned about potentially a significant number of people, particularly those on Medicaid, particularly those who are struggling, older people, potentially getting thrown off or having it be harder for them to get their health insurance? Loaded question, I know. I'm not buying that you believe in that.
Well, I can go through policy by policy where I believe and what I don't, but I do not consider myself.
Concerns?
I do have concerns, and I do have concerns specifically on health care. And I'm not dogmatic in that I agree with everything my party does. But anything, Republican and Democrat, you kind of have to pick one if you want to make progress, but it doesn't mean you have to buy into everything either party. And I think the best people from both parties understand that each one of the parties falls short in certain areas. So certainly on health care, as someone who's a Catholic, a Christian, I believe we need to take care of the poor. I think New Jersey did the right thing with a Republican governor and a Democrat legislature coming together to expand Medicaid for people who need it. And that's what government should do.
Not every state did that.
Not every state.
Christie led that effort. Democrats were with him.
He did. And I think, certainly Republicans need to do a better job of explaining, because most Republicans want to do that. They don't want to kick poor people off and get out of their health care, but they do want it to be delivered more efficiently. They don't want to waste taxpayer dollars. Republicans need to explain why this is going to work for people who need it, not just have it be a statistic about we're throwing people off.
Mike DuHaime is a Republican strategist and partner at Mercury and has been a key player, a consultant, a campaign manager at the state, at the national level, and we thank you for joining us.
Thanks,
State
Steve.
of Affairs.
Appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
everybody. Thank you.
Thanks, Ben.
State of Affairs. I think we'll be right back right after this if I keep talking. Thanks, Mike.
Good. Thank you.
State of Affairs with Steve Adubato is a production of the Caucus Educational Corporation, celebrating over 25 years of broadcast excellence. State of Affairs with Steve Adubato is brought to you from the Agnes Veris NJTV studio at 2 Gateway. Funding has been provided by St. Peter's University, JFK Medical Center, QualCare Inc., Fedway Associates, New Jersey State Nurses Association, and the Institute for Nursing, Verizon, and by Suez. Promotional support provided by Observer New Jersey Politics, and by Commerce Magazine.